Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian. And sure, Josh won't marry me because I'm not rich enough, but he'll learn the hard way.
What am I going to learn? That's a very ominous, non-specific threat there.
As it should be.
It's Wuthering Heights. Everyone's learning things the hard way in this one, right? So.
Yeah, I suppose you're gonna come take over my home and kick me out of it. Maybe is that what's gonna happen?
If your brother was a real bastard to me, I would have to do that. But okay. I mean, he didn't kick out Kathy, so
that is true. That is true.
He didn't even kick out Edward or whatever the dude's name was. Was it Edward?
It was Edgar.
Edgar, yeah.
Whatever the dude's name was, we've really delved deeply into this film that we're about to talk about. In this season of Awesome Movie Year, we've been talking about the films of 1939, and we're here at an episode. This category kind of changes a lot. Oftentimes, this is the Sundance Film Festival winner. Sometimes it's a winner from a different film festival. And when there aren't really any film festival winners to talk about, we have looked at other award winners. And there weren't a lot of awards giving entities in 1939, but the New York Film Critics Circle was, I believe, the only group of film critics that was giving awards out at this point. And their best film pick was Wuthering Heights, based on the novel by Emily Brontë, directed by William Wyler, and starring Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff and Merle Oberon as Kathy, his... Are they star-crossed lovers? I don't know exactly how we would want to
tortured lovers. Yeah, I'd say
they are. They're tortured by themselves, though. Really,
yeah. Right? They admit to that. They admit that they love torturing each other. Today, I mean, the word toxic wasn't around back then, right? But I feel like had they just gone to couples therapy, this one could have been solved because the love is there for them. So
right, and I mean, it's interesting to read about, because I've never read the novel, and I think we can all agree, none of us have read this book, right?
No, I remember it was assigned to me in high school, and I read the Cliff Notes, and I'd actually watched this movie. And in high school, I don't think I was, on the same wavelength. I liked it much better this time, but real fast, Josh. I just want to say I'm glad we are covering this film because 1939 to go through a entire year and not talk about William Wyler. I mean, come on, you got to talk about this guy. And Olivier kind of really set himself up with this one as the future star. He was already a huge star on stage, but this was the breakthrough for him on film.
Yeah, and William Wyler, I mean, we'll talk, I'm sure, more about his whole career, but an amazing director who's made tons and tons of great movies. So, yeah, I mean, I was glad to find an interesting, notable movie to fit into this category. Thank you, New York Film Critics Circle. But
much better than those Vegas film critic cucks.
Yeah, they didn't exist in 1939. I don't think there were any film critics in Las Vegas, or maybe even movie theaters in Las Vegas in 1939. I don't know when the Huntridge opened.
But back to your point about none of us knowing how to read classic books.
Right. Yeah. I never we went to high school together, but I think I must have been in a different English class because I don't think this was ever even assigned for me to read at any point. And so I certainly didn't read it on my own initiative.
I wonder if it was assigned to me when I was still in New Jersey, because I feel like we were both in the same English class as Harrington and then Peterson.
Yeah, it's possible. There's a lot of reminiscing about our high school days has come up lately.
Josh, there's a lot of reminiscing in this film.
There is. So, the point that I was going to make, though, is that since I haven't read the book, I can only see what people's reactions to it are. And it's interesting that you said that this is like a toxic relationship, but the love is there. And I think the impression that a lot of people get from the book is, yes, it is toxic, but that it's not, the love isn't really there, that Heathcliff is more like a villain and he doesn't really love her. He just kind of wants to control her.
So I actually even wrote this down in my notes. Was Heathcliff abusive? ? Because these are issues I had with the film and the characterization. And, there's all this stuff of there's an evil in this house or there's an evil within him. And I'm like, well, it just sounds like he loves someone. And she does the same thing to him. They treat each other poorly,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And it just seems like two people who want to love each other, but refuse to allow themselves to do that. as opposed to, some of the more controlling relationships or more toxic, quote unquote. I didn't think that was clear in this. And this whole idea of like the evil within Wuthering Heights, I didn't really get that either.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think other versions maybe play those aspects up or maybe portray Heathcliff as more abusive or in a more villainous light. I mean, everyone here is kind of a dick, really, right? I mean, it's not just Heathcliff and Kathy. Hindley, Kathy's brother, he's a real jerk.
Yeah, he's a douche
Yeah,
nozzle.
he really is.
So.
And even Edgar, played by David Niven, her kind of genteel suitor who she ends up marrying, he's real condescending and he's kind of a jerk too. So, I mean, you get a lot of that here. So,
with the Edgar character, I think again, we talk a lot about this in this year. He seems to just be one of these rich guys who has never left the bubble. So he doesn't really know how to treat anyone outside of his little bubble. And like, I'm not excusing that behavior, but I think we're getting a lot in this year of kind of like the rich upper crust don't know how to deal with people outside of that class system.
Yeah. And certainly that class dynamic is a main theme of this film, with Heathcliff as this urchin that they've picked up. The father has picked up Kathy's father on like the side of the road in was it London or where the bigger city where he travels to. And of course, he always feels like an outsider because he doesn't come from this nobility. And even Kathy, you can tell that Wuthering Heights as like a place is not nearly as fancy as Edgar's estate. So even between them, there's a difference of class.
The Linton estate.
The Linton estate. It also has a name, Thrushcross Grange, I think.
Mm.
I will say, like, I think I said this in another episode. I feel like the way you can tell if you're really, really, really rich is if your home has a name.
Yes, and spoiler alert, when we get to the Best Picture episode of this year, every home has a name.
So this film was highly, highly regarded. I believe it was a success financially. I couldn't find any box office info for this. It also is the earliest surviving adaptation of the Wuthering Heights novel. There's a 1920 silent version, but that has been lost. And certainly this was the most notable. I mean, this was the biggest deal in terms of these adaptations.
And I got to jump in on that, Josh.
Yeah.
I mean, a silent version of this movie, I don't know how that one works because this is a dialogue-heavy movie, and I don't know how many of these title cards you could have read, but the performances and the dialogue are the strengths of this film.
Yeah, and I mean, silent films often have very broad, exaggerated acting, which I think works for this kind of story. But yeah, there's a lot of heavy dialogue here that you probably would be lost in that film, but we'll never know.
The Before trilogy, as done by silent film players.
So this film was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director for William Wyler, Best Actor for Laurence Olivier, Best Supporting Actress for Geraldine Fitzgerald, who plays Isabella, the sister of Edgar Linton, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Original Score. It won the Oscar for Best Black and White Cinematography for Greg Toland, the cinematographer. As we said, did win the Best Film Award from the New York Film Critics Circle. And the National Board of Review also gave acting awards to Laurence Olivier and Geraldine Fitzgerald. It's sort of interesting to me that she was singled out. Not that she was bad, but I guess I wouldn't have come away from the film thinking, oh, she's the one who's going to win these awards.
I mean, I was shocked when I was reading that because Merle Oberon holds her own with Laurence Olivier, right? Like she carries the movie with him. So she's the one who should have gotten the award nominations. But I don't know. I was surprised she didn't get a Best Actress nomination for this.
Yeah, at least a nomination, especially a movie like this that gets so many nominations overall. But yeah, for whatever reason, maybe it was just there were too many other strong contenders in that category.
I mean, Barbie 1939, Josh.
Yeah, Barbie was definitely what I thought of as I was watching this film. Mm-hmm. So critics were pretty positive about this as well. Frank S. Nugent in the New York Times said, out of Miss Bronte's strange tale of a tortured romance, Mr. Goldwyn, that's producer Samuel Goldwyn, and his troupe have fashioned a strong and somber film, poetically written as the novel not always was, sinister and wild as it was meant to be, far more compact dramatically than Miss Brontë had made it. It isn't exactly a faithful transcription, which would have served neither Miss Brontë nor the screen, whatever the Brontë societies may think about it. But it is a faithful adaptation, written reverently and well, which goes straight to the heart of the book, explores its shadows, and draws dramatic fire from the savage flints of scene and character hidden there. William Wyler has directed it magnificently, surcharging even his lighter scenes with an atmosphere of suspense and foreboding, keeping his horror-shadowed narrative moving at a steadily accelerating pace, building absorbingly to its tragic climax.
So I think it covers 16 of the 34 chapters from the book. And this was smart. This was a smart move because it's either becomes like a huge sprawling, what we would consider a limited series, which, hey, as we know, they've made those versions of it too. Or it becomes a unruly movie that loses some focus. And, what they did is really honed in on, the Kathy and the Heathcliff relationship. And I think this was the right way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the parts that are missing are a whole sort of second generation story where the children of Kathy and Heathcliff and Edgar and Hindley all grow up and they have their own dramas, and Heathcliff is still there and it's still kind of focused on him, it seems like. But that's all left out. And certainly it does sound, I mean, just from reading summaries or whatever, like it is a lot. It is a bit confusing and cluttered. And like you said, there have been limited series versions of this. There have been many, many different versions of this. But most, I think even some of those miniseries versions do eliminate that second generation story. And I think in a way, it's like what we were talking about with Gulliver's Travels, is that because this was the first adaptation really that a lot of people saw and is so famous, this becomes the way that people know the story, and further adaptations just use this part, like they just use that one part of Gulliver's Travels.
And today, I know you hate hearing it, Josh, but this is a Gilded Age type limited series where you can do those generational stories. And I think that works for this.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely could. And I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all for a new version of this to come out where they're going to really delve into all of the, adapt the entire book, and that's the hook for it. And it's, 8 episodes or whatever. And yeah, I'd probably find it a little tedious or a little much, but you're right that this is definitely lends itself to something like that.
And I don't know if we know this, does the book, this movie has the framing device where there's a visitor who comes in and thinks he hears a ghost. And then it's Ellen, the kind of, what would you call her? She's more than a housekeeper. She basically runs the entire estate, right?
I mean, I think, yeah, estate manager / housekeeper. I'm not sure. Yeah.
So she tells him the whole story about Heathcliff and Kathy, and that's used as the bookend device. And it works quite well in this film. I don't know if it's in the book or not.
I believe it is. I mean, again, just from reading the summary, I think it is. It's just that he shows up and the people in the house, instead of we see Isabella, you see the kids. It's the kids. Yeah. And then I think Heathcliff is maybe dead by then. Spoiler alert.
That's a sad ending.
Well, he also dies in the movie. It's just that he's already dead by the time of the framing sequence. I think. I'm not sure. I did look it up. It definitely exists in some form.
Cool.
So Variety, in their unbylined review, was a little more mixed. They said, Wuthering Heights will have to depend on class audiences. Its general somberness and psychological tragedy is too heavy for general appeal. With that setup, and lacking Sacco marquee dressing, Picture is more of an artistic success for the carriage trade. Stark tragedy is vividly etched throughout. Tempo is at a slow pace, with many sequences devoted to development of psychological reactions of the characters. It's rather dull material for general audiences. Olivier provides a fine portrayal as the moody, revengeful lover. Miss Oberon is excellent throughout, nicely tempering her changing moods. Direction by William Wyler is slow and deliberate, accenting the tragic features of the piece.
Stupid character development.
I was laughing through the whole thing. I was just like, you dummies aren't going to get any of this. That's what she was basically saying.
Who is the carriage? What did he say?
The carriage trade? I'm not sure if that is referring to like it being a period piece where they're in horse and carriages, or maybe it just is some one of their terms for like upscale audiences or something. I'm not sure exactly. I just thought you'd appreciate the use of the word Sacco.
I just like that the review, as Dave was pointing out, is like, oh, they spent so much time on developing these characters. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, Variety, especially in this era, is often about like assessing, the box office prospects for a film. Of course, they were not right about this. This was a successful film, so it obviously reached a larger audience than just the carriage trade.
Yeah. My thought in my mind, and of course, is in my mind, what I'm seeing is people who are still traveling by carriage, but instead of like watching a movie on airplanes, they have a little television in the back of the carriage, and then, showing on this ride, Wuthering Heights. I hope you like character development.
That is an interesting combination of technologies there that I don't know that would work, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure. So finally, Graham Greene in The Spectator was not a fan. He said, how much better they would have made Wuthering Heights in France. They know there how to shoot sexual passion. But in this Californian constructed Yorkshire, among the sensitive, neurotic English voices, sex is cellophane. There is no egotism, no obsession. The plot has been simplified, quite reasonably, to cover only one generation. The minor characters have been tidied up or away, and darkness most of the time takes the place of the original's disquieting passion. Candle flames flicker, windows blow in drafts, monstrous shadows lie across the indifferent faces of the actors, all to lend significance to a rather dim story, which would not have taxed the talents of Mr. Ben Hecht to have invented himself. So a lot of reverence has gone into a picture which should have been as coarse as a sewer.
Ben Hecht is one of the screenwriters here, legendary screenwriter. We'll go over kind of all the wonderful awards and screenplays that he had a hand in. And he has so many credits where it's like a classic movie that he didn't, where he has like an uncredited. So he has so many non-credits on those, I should say. As someone who did like this movie, I do agree that, all American movies at this time, we've talked about it, how this sexuality isn't there. Whereas in like Rules of the Game, that we covered, it's a lot more forward moving, forward thinking, momentum with it. So I don't disagree with his criticism.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. But on the other hand, and this is The Spectator is a UK paper, so they're not working necessarily under the same constraints, but I'm sure he would be aware of what those constraints are. And I think within the context of that, they do what they can. I mean, I think to me, it's more that he's criticizing, and there's even more in the review that he basically dismisses all the performances, and he says, their faces are indifferent here, like they're very expressive. That's completely not true. And also the idea that he's essentially like dismissing the entire classic novel Wuthering Heights, like, a screenwriter could have come up with this. Like, not that Ben Hecht isn't a genius, but I mean, he's not Emily Brontë.
Yeah, well, Emily Brontë, this was her only book, along with, poems that she and her sisters put out, and that's because she died so young. We don't know what she would have written.
You can't blame her for that. Like, she was.
I wasn't blaming her, Josh. So I was just stating a fact that she died young. We never
know if she could have written a screenplay as well as Ben Hecht.
But what I was going to say is, one book. She hit a home run right here, right? We're still making this movie over and over again today.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, all of those Brontes basically just became known for one or two things, and something that we still pay attention to.
Are you a member of a Brontë society?
No, but they must have existed there, at least in New York City in 1939. I don't know. Maybe this movie was made because there was a resurgence in interest in the book. I'm not sure about that.
Well, one of the things I read were the Brontë Society members were protesting, or let's say imploring, Goldwyn and the makers of this film not to change the title from Wuthering Heights, because they had some really bad titles that they were going to go with. Gypsy Love. Here's one that doesn't fit at all. Fun on the Farm. And He Died for Her.
That sounds totally like a melodrama title from the 1930s, but obviously, I feel like this is one of those things that even in 1939, you gotta go with the IP, right? People are gonna see this because they're familiar with Wuthering Heights. You got to keep that.
Imagine if you went into a movie not knowing anything but the title, and it was called Fun on the Farm, and this is what you got.
Yeah, that would not be the right way to market.
I mean, I would argue, one, there's certainly a lack of fun, but I don't even know how much of a farm there is on this estate. There are animals, but it's not much of a farm.
No, it's really not. I don't think you can grow much on the heather there or whatever it's called.
The craggy moors of England via Southern California.
Right, exactly. So Jason, so you watched this movie in high school when you read or didn't read the book?
Yeah, I liked it better this time. So hooray for me maturing.
Yeah. Did you watch it as like, oh, I'll watch this instead of reading the book and that'll be good enough kind of thing?
Would I ever do that? Of course, every time I was assigned a book that there was a movie about, yes. That plus the Cliff Notes. But I would always read on the Cliff Notes just the summaries, not the analyses.
That's good. You don't want to learn anything about the deeper themes of the book.
I mean, I can learn I figure I can, between the lessons and between my own, mind, Josh, I can figure out some of those themes myself.
All right. Dave, had you seen this?
Nope, hadn't seen it. Of course, didn't read the book. And all I knew was the title. It's one of those classics that, you always hear about, but I had no idea going into it what it was really.
Yeah. Or so then hadn't seen any other various versions of this either. Yeah.
No.
I had not seen this one. We'll talk about all the other versions later. And I watched another one, as I know, Jason, that you did as well. But prior to this, I had seen the 2011 film, the Andrea Arnold film, which is a sort of experimental take that is not a good way to be introduced to the story if you're not familiar with it. So I felt like I was coming into this completely cold because I did not really know or remember any of the details about what goes on here. And I enjoyed it too, I think.
I bet this is the best version. I will bet on that.
I think it's still generally regarded that way, even though there's some of the other versions that have good reputations. So anything else you want to get into about the background of this film, Jason?
Josh, fun fact, I was almost named after the character Heathcliff. My mom wanted to name me Jackson Heathcliff after Jackson Browne and Heathcliff from this book. And I mean, it would have been weird knowing what his emotional status is. So, but I guess it makes sense if you knew my mom. Also, this is so random, but my grandparents, we had this summer house on a lake, right? And there was a sign outside, and my mom had named the house South Wind, right? Like that was and I never knew why she came up with it. And I thought, like, is it a Gone with the Wind thing? Is it this? It's that. And I didn't realize until we watched this movie this past week, there's this line as Kathy is in bed where she's like, is there a south wind coming or something along those lines? And I was like, well, now this makes sense, knowing my mom's love for this movie, that we had a summer house, all this stuff. Like, so that was a nice puzzle that I was able to solve this week.
So is it this movie that your mom loved, or was it the book that she loved?
I think probably both. My mom loved classic films, but I bet she loved the book too.
Yeah. All right.
If I ever see her ghost on the crag, I'll try to ask her.
See if you can get her to guest on the podcast.
I don't know if we have that technology.
No, not quite yet. We'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on Wuthering Heights. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1939, we are talking about Wuthering Heights, the classic adaptation of a classic book, I guess is what I'm saying here. So Jason, you said the first time you watched it, maybe you weren't into it in high school and now you appreciated it more this time?
I definitely did. I think maybe I had to live more life to really appreciate it, go through some heartbreaks, some of my own toxic relationships, right? And then, I mean, to me, like I said, that's what really carries this piece is there's really, really biting, like really good dialogue. I'm sure a lot of it was taken right from the book, but this whole idea of like when spoiling a book and a movie from over 100 years ago on the book and getting close to it on the movie, but when she dies and he's like, I don't want you to rest in peace, I want you to haunt me until I die, like really great epic romantic tortured stuff there that carried it. And I thought Olivier and Oberon were maybe the best duo we've seen in this season.
They're definitely up there. I mean, we've seen a lot of good, love affair and I don't know, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We've seen a lot of good romantic chemistry here, but certainly that level of, like you were saying, that the passion that's on this, it's not even just melodrama. It's like on this epic scale. Like they're so consumed. They have nothing else in their lives. If they're not together, they're just constantly tortured by not being together. And then when they are together, they're constantly tortured by being together.
Right. I agree with you. I don't think it's melodrama. I think it's beyond that, this might be not the best comparison, but I kind of felt that way with the relationship in Revolutionary Road with Leo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. I thought those were two great performances of people who loved each other but didn't know how to love each other, and they destroyed each other. And that's kind of what we have here.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I saw that. And I think I didn't really like that movie. But certainly, I mean, not only that, but there are, I think, many examples of that kind of relationship going forward, in part because it's influenced by the book and by this movie. And this is such an archetypal version of that. The idea of these people who are, they're so tortured that they can't, like you said, if they just went to couples counseling, they just could like chill out for half a second, they could probably be happy together because they want to be together. Or again, at least that's how we see it in the movie. Whether or not other portrayals show Heathcliff as just kind of wanting to control her and not really love her, I feel like in this movie, we do get the sense that they genuinely do love each other, even if they're incapable of just, living it.
I think they definitely love each other, but I do wonder without the drama if that spark would still be there. There's that whole idea of like fucking and fighting, and when we're done fighting, we'll fuck again, and then we'll fight again. And it's like, that's what these two had. It wasn't like, oh, let's have a nice picnic and talk about our days together. Like every conversation they had is a matter of life and death, right? And that type of relationship or movie can be too much and not effective unless it's done expertly. And that's what I really appreciated about this. And also, like, it makes you think, like, dude, Emily Brontë died when she was 30. Like, what an amazing relationship to write in your 20s.
Yeah, and the Brontes all were very sheltered, so I don't know if she was writing this from experience per se or just sort of imagining it. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I think a lot of people hold up in their own romantic notions, and maybe that's not really what you want to be striving for in real life or whatever. But wanting to feel that consumed by passion for somebody, that's the kind of real relationship that gives you life and makes life worth living, kind of thing that I think a lot of people look for. But yeah, it did to me after a while get exhausting watching this movie. Like, all right, just chill already.
Right.
I think it gets a bit much after a while. And both of them, they're so mercurial. Like you said, it's that back and forth and the back and forth. And sometimes even in the same scene where Kathy will be like, I do not want to see you again, Heathcliff. I am now with Edgar and I am a refined lady. And then he goes away and then she's like, oh no, why did he go away? I cannot be without him. It's like, fucking make up your mind, lady.
Oh, that's part of the deal, right? I don't want you until you don't want me. And then you're all that I want.
Right.
So that's the strength of the movie, right? I didn't dislike the side story, which we've seen in other things also, of like, hey, this poor guy is going to be our whipping boy and our servant. And then he turns, himself into something. And now he can take, quote unquote, revenge or, give other people their comeuppance. We just saw this in Wonka this past year, Josh. Wonka.
Could Emily Brontë have written Wonka? No.
So, but like I said, what was confusing to me are these elements of, the idea that Heathcliff was evil or abusive, and the idea that the entire property of Wuthering Heights brought an evil about people.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, at least for the majority of the film, that Heathcliff is sympathetic, right? Like you said, he's this poor urchin. You never really learn what his true origin is, and he himself seems to maybe not know. But, he's grown up on the streets without parents, and he's lucky enough to be brought into this wealthier family, and yet Hindley treats him like shit all the time. And even Kathy, who he loves, I mean, she's the one who rejects him first, right? She says, oh, I have to be a lady. I have to be able to enter this society, and essentially you're not good enough for me. And so I feel like you're rooting for him, even if he's kind of a jerk sometimes. And it's only really later in the film, especially when Kathy is married, and especially as she's dying, where he kind of goes too far about, you are mine, and all this stuff, and that seems a bit controlling or abusive, emotionally at least. But I was on his side most of the time.
Yeah, there's a real kinship between Kathy and Barry Lyndon,
Man,
with
Barry
their
Lyndon again?
don't you think so? They're obsessed with their status.
Yeah,
those
I
two.
suppose so. I mean, Barry Lyndon is more of a like ruthless social climber, and I think Kathy she just wants
to stay within her class.
That one particular thing. And once she marries Edgar, then that's where she's not trying to then like throw over Edgar for someone who's richer or has a higher title or something like that. She's
in fact the opposite, because Heathcliff comes back, he's rich, they're still in love, and she won't go to him.
Right. So I don't know if she's as much of that social climber. And I feel like part of it too is the security, and how do you have security as a woman in this era, because you can't own anything on your own, and you can't work, and you can't have a title, and all these things. Like, well, you have to marry well in order to be secure. And when Heathcliff is just the orphan that they took in, he doesn't have that security to offer her. And that's understandable.
And I thought they did a good job also with establishing Kathy's motives for all of that behavior.
Right. And Edgar, again, he's kind of, I think he's maybe a little more sympathetic in other versions. I don't know. But, he's very rude and condescending to Heathcliff when he's gotten the girl, he's married her, and yet he can't just be gracious or whatever.
Josh, what I got to give Heathcliff credit for is Hindley as a kid. Like, this is the whole impetus of this revenge plot. Not even a revenge plot, but like, I'm going to get you back. Hindley is a dick to Heathcliff all the time. But at one time, Heathcliff and Kathy are playing, and Hindley like takes his horse and then throws a rock at Heathcliff, right? And he goes, "I'll get you as long as it takes, however long it takes. Believe me, I'll get you, Hindley." And then he basically carries that grudge with him for over 20 years until like Hindley's destroying himself, and Heathcliff can buy the manor, buy Wuthering Heights, and then he still keeps Hindley there just to let him know, like, "Hey, dude, I could have kicked you out, but I'm better than you, and you're going to see that every day." And man, what a grudge to hold! What a way to hold that grudge.
I mean, everyone in this movie, they're all the kind of people who never let anything go.
Never.
Nobody here is forgiving. They don't move on. They don't get closure. Even after they're dead, they can't let go.
Right. And that's true. That's true. So, I mean, you said Heathcliff is sympathetic, but when we first see him, when this Lockwood character, this visitor comes, he's a real jerk to him. And at this point, I guess he's a real jerk to everyone because of how much he misses Kathy. But it's an interesting way to get into this character because he's the main story is about him, right? So for when we see him and he's just an asshole to everyone, it's like, huh? What is happening here?
Right. Yeah. I mean, he definitely is rude to this guy who's just come in out of the snowstorm and is just trying to get warm or whatever. Who's not even really a character. His function is basically just to get
plot device.
Yeah, he's a plot device. But yeah, you're right. And I think maybe giving that as our first impression of Heathcliff makes us inclined to view him a certain way. But even so, I felt like, no, I can understand why he's so bitter by that point now that I've learned the whole story about what happened to him.
And I think part of that is Olivier. Olivier is really, really excellent in this film. And as I've stated, I'm not always a fan of the older time style and where everything is bigger, but I think Olivier pulls it off. He, in fact, said that Wyler was the one who taught him how to act on film because he came from the theater and like every take he was like, quote unquote, performing to the back row of the theater. Everything was big and booming and yelling, and Wyler just almost in a Fincher type way of exhausting the actor, or a Kubrickian type way, where he made him just do like 50, 100 takes on each thing until he just kind of beat him into submission to act the way he wanted to. And he had nothing but reverence for Wyler for making him do that.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the performances in this are quite big anyway. I mean, not only in relation to the style of acting at the time, but even more so than that. So to imagine how big Olivier's performance would have been before it was toned down, before Wyler got him to scale back a bit. I mean, it would have been a little, probably way too much, which I'm sure Wyler understood.
I think that, we see all these Ryan Murphy feud series, like the making of Wuthering Heights would lend itself to the type of drama that Wuthering Heights had, because Oberon was once in a romantic relationship with Niven, and they didn't want to work together because of that. Olivier wanted Vivian Lee, his girlfriend, as the lead, and he and Oberon fought constantly. Wyler was fighting with everyone. Goldwyn was, throwing out that producer card all the time, just obliterating people. It sounds like the whole thing was just full of drama.
Right. And as I think we've said about other movies this season, that you think that would be a problem, but it leads to whatever it was. It leads to this really well-made film that, maybe in a way for this kind of movie, all of these people getting so riled up and getting so passionate was something that they could feed into their performances and made the movie better.
There's a real combustibility to it.
Yes. So, I mean, what you said, Olivier, what do you think of other performances? Any smaller ones that stand out to you?
I mean, Oberon, as I said in the intro, was like, dude, just killing the game here, right? I was really shocked that she didn't get an Academy Award nomination for this thing. You had mentioned Fitzgerald, who was fine, but I don't know why she was the one who got all the accolades. Obviously, Niven's, is a legend in his own right. But I thought Flora Robson as Ellen, the kind of housekeeper character, and I also thought the doctor, Dr. Kenneth, Donald Crisp were quite good as well.
Yeah, the doctor he's the one who's like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? That's his function. He just comes in. It's like, they need help. They all need help. Yeah. And at one point he's just like, don't call me anymore. Forget it.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Well, he's like, Kathy, I brought you into this world. I'm here for you. And then he's like, towards the end, he's just like, oh, Kathy, what has become of you? That type of thing. Yeah. Was there something that you really liked in here that from a performance aspect?
I mean, I feel like those, Merle Oberon and Laurence Olivier, as you said, they're so big, and the characters are obviously so domineering that they kind of crowd out any of those smaller characters, really. And I mean, that's another reason I think why it's surprising that Geraldine Fitzgerald got that nomination, because she doesn't have the chance to make a big impression. And Isabella is the one character here, I think, that's meant to be like a purely nice person. And so that's refreshing to us, I think, as an audience to get that, oh, here's someone who's just well-intentioned and friendly, but it doesn't necessarily allow for a lot of range in the performance. And I mean, I guess there is, she's so maybe a bit naive or whatever, and she's so open to, and she wants to marry Heathcliff. And then we do see her a little later after they've been married, and we realize he's kind of, if he mistreats anyone, it's really more her than it is Kathy, right? Because he marries her, even though he doesn't love her or even care about her, as a way to just sort of spite Kathy. And then he ignores her and mistreats her while she's married, and she's sort of lost all of her vitality when we see her later.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with her is that she, like you're using the word naive there, right? So, I mean, there isn't much to play except either that full on, I'm in love, this is great, or, oh man, I kind of messed up, I kind of stoinked this one.
Right. And I think we get that. And she does effectively play that contrast, I think, where you can really see the change in the character. So that's a feat of acting. But yeah, overall, I would not have picked her out as someone who would have gotten an Oscar nomination.
Right. I mean, I think she would have been wise to have taken heed with the lyrics to the song Heathcliff. Heathcliff, Heathcliff, no one should terrify their neighborhood. But Heathcliff just won't be undone, playing pranks on everyone.
This is, of course, a song about Heathcliff the cat, I assume.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, one Heathcliff is another Heathcliff in my mind.
Obviously, yes. There aren't that many Heathcliffs, and then you yourself you're not a Heathcliff. So You
Almost.
have to look elsewhere for it.
Heathcliff the cat never treated Sonia the way that Heathcliff the man treated Kathy. I'll say that much.
No, he did not. I mean, certainly this is the most famous Heathcliff that there is, I feel like. And to the point where I was wondering, because of course, the name Heathcliff, I mean, they live along a cliff where there's heath or heather. I honestly was like, maybe did Emily Brontë like invent this name and then people started using it because it's so appropriate? And she didn't, as far as I could tell. I mean, I was trying to look up the origin of it, and the origin of it is Heath and Cliff, but that was something that was common in the English countryside, and so people named their children that, and Brontë just kind of grabbed onto it, I think.
I want to give props to the production design on this thing because, I've kind of said, and we know a lot of it's based on the technology, but you can kind of tell when we're in a studio lot or on a location that doesn't match. And here we know they shot this all in Southern California, but I felt like we were in England on the craggy moors,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it does look really good, and it gives you that sense of sort of isolation and starkness and, lots of cold winds, as we were talking about, and everything. And the interiors too. Like I was saying before, I think you can really tell just by going inside Wuthering Heights, the estate, and going inside Thrushcross Grange, you can see clearly what the differences are in status between these two families and the way that they even just take care of their places, right? Maybe if Hindley had not been such a dick and had paid attention to taking care of Wuthering Heights when he was responsible for it, it wouldn't have looked so dirty and run down.
And if he wasn't such a douche, he probably could have kept Wuthering Heights also.
Right. Well, we learned he's gone into debt for gambling, and he also seems to drink himself to death, I guess. Do we actually get his death, or he just kind of wanders off at one point and then we don't see him anymore?
I think that's it. But also, I mean, we really just see the way he treats Kathy and the way he treats Heathcliff. So we have to assume he probably treats everyone this badly.
Right. I mean, and he seems to have that kind of demeanor right from the start. I mean, he's never friendly to Heathcliff. It's not like there's a betrayal and he starts to hate him. He hates him from the moment he sees him.
Yeah, really messed up because their dad brought him in and it's like, he's one of us now.
Right. I did like also that Heathcliff doesn't have a last name, and that when he marries Isabella, they call her Mrs. Heathcliff.
That's good. Yeah, why not? So wouldn't you want your betrothed to be Mrs. or Mr. Josh?
I mean, no, I have a last name, and I mean, I'd want them to keep their own, I think. But either way, I just thought it was amusing that, right? And because like Kathy and Hindley, they have a last name. Their last name is Earnshaw, and their father brings Heathcliff in and is like, he's one of us, but he doesn't get our name. We're just gonna call this kid Heathcliff. And that's the name that the father gives him, that name. He doesn't even have a name. He's like, you boy, you are Heathcliff. Period. Yeah, but you're like Prince, but even Prince had a last name, right?
Well, the dad died shortly thereafter.
He died before he thought of another name for a surname.
Maybe the paperwork hadn't gone through yet. You have to take horses everywhere, Josh.
Right. Yeah. Heathcliff had no trouble with paperwork, right? He took over Wuthering Heights very easily with the mortgage and everything, and without Hindley even knowing it. So
we don't know how he made his fortune. So I like to think he was a banana salesman.
Yeah, he goes to America, and then when they ask him, he makes some snide remark or whatever, and doesn't actually say how it happened. And I don't know if we learn in the book how exactly it is.
Josh, you had two people we want to mention and let Dave jump in on here are Greg Toland, who you mentioned, and also Alfred Newman, who we've talked about before, who did the music, Kathy's theme. I mean, that's got to be part of why you kind of feel this swell of emotion. That music really takes it to the next level.
Yeah, Dave, did you have any thoughts on the music or anything else that you liked about the movie?
Yeah, well, to me, the music, the big emotions that you guys have been talking about this whole time, as well as like the kind of ghost story around the edges of it all, as well as the black and white cinematography, this whole film felt very goth to me. Like this could be the inspiration for a million Cure songs, and so that's what I liked about it a lot. It really,
that's a quote.
Yeah, right. It dived right into exactly that same vibe that you get from listening to them or any of those kinds of bands.
Yeah, they went big, but they executed big, yes. Right? So, Josh, you mentioned Toland won the award for I guess it would be best black and white
Yeah,
cinematography.
as we were
here.
talking about in one other episode, there were two cinematography categories all the way until like this sometime in the 60s, I believe.
Right. And he was one of the forerunners, one of the fathers of deep focus, and kind of the way he uses light to keep characters in dark until like they're really getting to the crux of what they're saying and getting them into the light. Just really, really kind of ahead of his time with what he was doing as a cinematographer here.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what you're saying, like, this is a Gothic novel. This is, I mean, the books
Yeah.
from this period, especially Brontë books, is like the origination of that whole goth ideal or whatever. So obviously the movie is going to try to capture that. And I think certain versions of it are maybe even gothier.
Nice.
But yeah, absolutely. This is something that fits right in with that whole subculture. So,
Yeah.
Jason, do you want to rate this out of 5 craggy moors?
5 craggy moors, 5 destructive love affair. Sure. 5 craggy moors. It gets 3 craggy moors from me. I like this movie. I think you should watch it.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 3 as well. I did like it. I think, like I said, it kind of wore on me after a while, but it's all really impressively put together, and certainly I'm glad that I saw it. Dave, how would you rate this?
I went 3.5. I liked it a lot.
All right, great. Well, we'll come back and talk about the legacy of Wuthering Heights. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1939, we have been talking about New York Film Critics Circle Best Film winner, Wuthering Heights. And as we said, this is the first sort of notable adaptation. It's the first one that is surviving, and it's probably still the best known. But there are many, many other Wuthering Heights adaptations. And Jason, I know you watched what is, I think, the next one, which is the Louis Buñuel version from 1954.
Yeah, you and I took very different routes on which ones to watch. I did watch Abismos de Pasión by Louis Buñuel. I believe it was filmed in Mexico, and it definitely looks like it's filmed in the deserts of Mexico or the Southwest of America. So that kind of takes away from it, because I feel like the British countryside, that kind of rough, rainy landscape is really important. I don't know if it necessarily works in the dry desert. The other thing is, Josh, you're talking about how in this one you kind of got like exhausted. You would totally be exhausted in that one, because I felt like they would run a scene, and then like the next scene they would run basically the same scene at different location, and it's like, we get it, you guys love each other but hate each other, right? So I'm glad I watched it. It's Buñuel. We always want to keep up on our classics, but I think this is the one we're covering is a better version. Now, I can't speak for you on the one that you watch, which I know you think is an all-timer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would have liked to watch the Buñuel. I mean, I think it was funny because it's hard to watch, at least in the US at this point, and I pointed you to the way to watch it, and then you watched it, and I instead decided to check out the 2003 version that was a made for MTV film produced by Jim Steinman, who of course best known as the songwriter for Meatloaf, who was apparently a longtime big fan of Wuthering Heights. And it's sort of like a quasi musical. It features a bunch of Jim Steinman songs, but like the characters perform the songs as they're musicians. It's not a traditional musical, but you do get a lot of performances of these not very good Jim Steinman songs. It is set in Southern California in 2003. Everyone kind of looks like they're trying to be on the OC or whatever. It's got Katherine Heigl as the Isabella character, Erica Christensen, who plays the Kathy character, who they call Kate, and they call Heathcliff Heath. And when as we were saying, in this version, we don't know how he makes his fortune, but in the 2003 version, he becomes a rock star on MTV, of course.
I thought you were going to say he was a drug dealer. Where's Erica Christensen? She did some really good work. I didn't really pronounce her name that well there, but I miss Erica Christensen. So.
I think I was looking that up because I thought the same thing. And she has been on a number of TV shows with like long running roles. So she still gets work. But I mean, it's everything about it is very, very 2003. Heath has a puka shell necklace, and the way he
Nice.
becomes famous when they're uploading his music to this like
MySpace.
music. Yeah, there's not even MySpace. It's like a bootleg version of that or whatever. One of those. I'm trying to think of
Napster.
Yeah, not even Napster. It was one of those early like digital music sites, and I can't think of it.
Reverb Nation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like Reverb
Or,
Nation.
Shark. What was the one? Groove Shark?
Groove Shark,
yeah,
maybe.
something like that. But it's a legit one, supposedly. And Katherine Heigl uploads his song without his permission because he's brooding and he doesn't want anyone to hear his songs about Kathy. And then he becomes super famous, but he seems kind of like annoyed with it. And he's just like literally dirty a lot of the time. Like they wanted to make him an orphan, so they just put some dirt on his face. And I don't know. It's like, it's so bad, but it's hilarious. I kind of loved it. John Doe from X plays the father. Amy Osborne is in it for some reason. It's a classic. Yeah, it's very, very bad. But I mean, I think it shows the range of ways that this has been adapted in so many different contexts by so many different people.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like a high school version of this, and it's Jim Steinman. You said
Jim Steinman,
yeah, dude. I mean, Dave, you were talking about The Cure. How about some Meatloaf songs? Like the entire Bat Out of Hell album, like is that cinematic and like life or death type feeling, that dramatic. I feel like it makes perfect sense for it.
Yeah, I mean, and famously, Kate Bush has a song called Wuthering Heights.
Not a huge fan of that song.
Do you guys know offhand, is this the most adapted movie?
I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of Shakespeare plays that have been adapted more times.
A Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. But I mean, it is often adapted. I mean, in addition to those that we watched, like I said, I've seen the 2011 version directed by Andrea Arnold that got some acclaim. That's a very kind of experimental take on the story. And for me, at least, coming into it not being familiar with any of the other versions yet, it was very confusing. But I think if you know Wuthering Heights, you can maybe better appreciate how she subverts it. There are a bunch of different miniseries versions. There's one from 2009 that featured Tom Hardy as Heathcliff. There's a 1970 film with Timothy Dalton that seems to be fairly notable. A 1992 film that seems like it would be like the adaptation with Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche, but is very poorly reviewed, unfortunately. Jacques Rivette, who's a major figure in the French New Wave, made a version of this in 1985 called Hurlevent. And Dave, have you seen the 2015 Lifetime movie Wuthering High?
I probably did, actually. That sounds like something we'd watch. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of, Josh, as you said, there's Bollywood movies, there's Filipino versions, there's a 3-part BBC miniseries called Spark House with the gender roles reversed. So that's interesting. Yeah. So, but yeah, I like Tom Hardy, but I'm not sure I want to see him as Heathcliff. So
I mean, Tom Hardy feels like he's right. Like Tom Hardy is the brooding guy, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he's right for that part.
Do you think when he walks into a scene, he says, "I'm Heathcliff"?
No, the great thing, that's a good Bane impression. But I feel like the great thing about Tom Hardy is that in every part, he's like, what new incomprehensible accent can I come up with for this part?
Yeah. I'm sure he was like, well, the Crags are, part of the coastal England, but this character was an urchin, so I'm going to throw in a little Manchester kind of vibe in there. Let's like mix these two accents and see what we can come up with here.
Yeah, I'd be curious. It's early in his career. I feel like the more famous he's gotten, the more leeway he gets from directors to just sound really weird because he's too famous for them to criticize him. So maybe he's more normal in this when he was less well known.
I think this would be ripe for a, another remake right now.
Yeah, I know. I think you're right. And like you said, it could be a long multi-part series where they really adapt the entire book, and that there are some versions. I think that Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche film actually does take on the whole book just in a feature film. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it's not as good, because it has to go through so much. But if you give it the time, perhaps that could work.
I mean, that casting sounds right to me. Juliette Binoche and Ralph Fiennes.
Yeah.
It sounds like good casting.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see it. Maybe I would like it, but just looking at Letterboxd and at the reviews from the time that it came out, it was not well regarded at all.
Yeah. Well, that's all right. They're both doing fine.
They are. So, as we said, William Wyler, I mean, one of the big directors of classic Hollywood, He was nominated 12 times for Best Director, won 3 of those Oscars for The Best Years of Our Lives, Ben-Hur, and Mrs. Miniver. I mean, worked all the way until 1970 was the last film that he directed. Ben-Hur, of course, is an amazing achievement. I got to see that in a theater one time, which was really cool. I personally love the movies that he made with Bette Davis. Jezebel, which is good, but The Letter and The Little Foxes in particular are 2 of my absolute favorite Bette Davis movies. Those are great. But The Heiress with Olivia de Havilland, Roman Holiday, Funny Girl, all the way into the 60s, making a major film there with Barbra Streisand, How to Steal a Million. I mean, just an insane career this guy had.
He's like one of these actor directors the same way that we would say like Soderbergh is now. Audrey Hepburn and Barbra Streisand, who you just mentioned, Roman Holiday and Funny Girl, both won Oscars, both in their debut films, working with Wyler. De Havilland and Bette Davis both won their second Oscars in Wyler films, in The Heiress and Jezebel. And he's just got, and each of his Best Picture winners has an Oscar winner in there: Greer Garson and Miniver, Frederick March in Best Years, and Charlton Heston in Ben-Hur.
And have you seen many or any of his other films? Do you have a favorite?
No, actually, I'm going to say it's a bit of a blind spot. I got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah. I mean, those are, like I said, I certainly recommend those. Jezebel is good, but The Letter and The Little Foxes, so good, and some of the best work that Bette Davis did in her entire career. They obviously worked really well together.
Do you think Heathcliff and Riff Raff ever crossed paths?
Riff Raff from Rocky Horror?
No, Riff Raff, the B story on the Heathcliff cartoon shows. They were always in the Junkyard Gang or whatever,
I think I watched Heathcliff the cartoon when I was a kid, but I feel like I don't really have any memory of it, but I can't even picture what Riff Raff looked like. But you're clearly a Heathcliff cartoon connoisseur.
Yeah, Riff Raff lived in like a junkyard. He had that big cat who wore a shirt and a beanie named Mongo, and then he had the roller skating cat who would always rhyme with him.
Yeah, I think
and he had a girlfriend
Mongo
too. Yeah. So Josh, Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur, the writers here, both won Academy Awards for Best Story for The Scoundrel in 1935. Hecht wrote, produced, and directed Angels Over Broadway, which was nominated for Best Screenplay, and he was nominated for 6 Screenplay Academy Awards, winning 2, Underworld, and one that I just watched, Notorious, which is a great Hitchcock movie with our friend Cary Grant.
Glad you could get the Cary Grant impression here into this episode.
Thank you, Ben, for writing me this wonderful part. Hello, Ben.
How do you think Cary Grant would have done playing Heathcliff? Probably wrong for that part.
He's too cool, right? Like there's no, he's so awesome. He's so cool at all the time. Oh, you don't want to be with me? Okay, I'll see you then. And then they'll just come running back to him. So.
Yeah. Probably not right for him. But Laurence Olivier, I mean, again, like Wyler, one of the absolute titans of classic Hollywood, one of the most acclaimed actors ever. As you said, he had this massive stage career, which predates his movie career, but also continued on as an actor on stage, as well as a theater director. As a film actor, he won an Oscar for Hamlet, as well as 2 honorary Oscars. I mean, such a long list of films that, like, iconic films. I think of, especially watching this movie, I thought of Hitchcock's Rebecca, which is another very gothic romance that was a year or 2 after this. And that personally I prefer. That's a great film, and he's fantastic in that. Also Spartacus, Bunny Lake is Missing, which is a great kind of underrated Otto Preminger film. The Frank Langella version of Dracula, where he plays Van Helsing, which is also kind of underrated. Clash of the Titans, Spartacus, Marathon Man. I think that's maybe what a lot of people know him for later on.
Yeah, that and Boys from Brazil, I'd say.
Yeah, and he has that, of course, that famous quote to Dustin Hoffman from Marathon Man, which I feel like we may have brought up before in other contexts, where Hoffman, in order to get the ragged nature of his character, stayed up for like 3 days straight and all this stuff. And Olivier said to him, "Why don't you try acting?" Right.
Well, yeah, but I mean, Wyler just basically, and Goldwyn basically did the same thing to him on this set, right? Where there's a story where Goldwyn was just like, "Oh my God, this guy is just screw." He like said it in front of everyone just to like kind of dress him down, and this guy's killing the movie. He's not performing well, and whatever kind of weird Oliver Stone mind game he played with him, it seemed to work. But it's funny that you mentioned that, like, he's such an important actor. There are literally awards named after him for acting,
Right.
the Olivier Awards, right?
Right.
So
yeah, if you think of that quintessential, especially like Shakespearean, he did a lot of stuff with Shakespeare on stage and on film, obviously with Hamlet. That's the one that always comes to mind is Olivier.
right, and he directed a lot of those. He directed Henry V, Hamlet, and Richard III also.
Right. Yeah, he was more of a, I think, more experienced director in theater, but also did direct films. As you said, it's sort of underwhelming to see Merle Oberon and how good she is here. This is really her best known film and her best known role. She had a pretty uneven career after this. A lot of films that didn't really work out. The only other one that it seems like it was a hit is a film called A Song to Remember, which I'm not familiar with, but she did work through the 1950s and then kind of sporadically into the 60s and retired in 1973. And it seems like her legacy a lot is all these kind of scandals about her early life and the stories about her birth and where she came from that were eventually adapted or kind of inspired a couple of different TV series that were
I don't know any of
classic
those.
Hollywood. So
where did she come from? Tell me.
well, I mean, this is just me reading Wikipedia, but she was born in India, and she's one of these the woman who raised her may have been, and who said was her mother, may have actually been her grandmother, and the woman who she was raised with as her sister may have really been her mother, who gave birth to
Jack Nicholson's story, right?
And gave birth to her as a teenager. So there's that. And it's possible that her father was her mother's like stepfather, that there was some sort of abuse going on there. And she also, because of the times, hid the fact that she was multiracial and, had to pass as white in order to get roles and stuff like that. So that's all, again, just from like Wikipedia and stuff. But there was her nephew wrote a novel that was kind of inspired by her life. Called Queenie, that was adapted into a miniseries in, I think, the 80s or 90s. And then there was an Amazon series not that long ago called The Last Tycoon, where a Merle Oberon type character with that similar kind of racial background was there, played by Jennifer Beals. So, I feel like she's an interesting Hollywood story. That's what is focused on more than her career as an actress.
Was that based on the film The Last Tycoon? The miniseries?
I don't believe so. I watched like an episode or two of it because I reviewed it when it came out. It had Matt Bomer as a film executive in like the 30s or 40s. I think it might have been based on something else, but with the same title, but not what you're referring to.
Oberon nominated for Best Actress, I think, in 35 for The Dark Angel.
Yeah. But this is really like, I was wondering if I'd seen her in anything, and I think there might have been one other movie where she was a supporting player that I had seen, but for the most part, this is what people know her for.
She's great in this movie.
She is. David Niven, as you said, also like a huge star. I know him mainly, I feel like, from these kind of urbane comedies, but he certainly did a lot of stuff. He won an Oscar for a film called Separate Tables, which I'm not familiar with, but I mean, A Matter of Life and Death, The Bishop's Wife, later in his career.
Around the World in 80 Days, Guns of Navarone, and then the Murder by Death and Death on the Nile movies.
Yeah. And I mean, I believe probably briefly talked about him in our episode on You Only Live Twice, because he was in that James Bond unofficial movie Casino Royale that year, which is awful, that I had watched for that.
I haven't seen that, but I feel like Niven's a little too laid back to be Bond.
Well, right. I mean, that's the point of that movie. It's basically a Bond parody where they have him as Bond. And I personally love another Otto Preminger movie that's, I think, super underrated, called Bonjour Tristesse, that he's in, where he plays this kind of like lecherous older man, and is great in that film. It's a very enjoyable, underrated film with Gene Seberg as his daughter.
Also in the Pink Panther films.
Yeah, which I haven't seen those. Have you?
The Peter Sellers ones, or the Steve Martin.
Well, he's not in the Steve Martin ones.
No, I love Peter Sellers. I haven't watched those though.
Yeah.
So
Geraldine Fitzgerald, who got this Oscar, she wasn't. That didn't necessarily catapult her into a bigger career, but she was a consistent character actor in TV and in film through 1991. And I did appreciate that she got an Emmy nomination for guest starring on The Golden Girls.
Yes, who'd she play?
I don't know. was just,
because I love the Golden Girls. I'm actually wearing a Golden Girls sweater right now, but I don't know who she was on the Golden Girls.
well, I mean, she was just in one episode, so I'm not really sure who, but she must have made an impression. She got that Emmy nomination.
Nice.
Josh, a lot of just kind of hammers here. We mentioned Donald Crispus, Dr. Kenneth. He won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in How Green Was My Valley. Flora Robson, who played Ellen, who we mentioned, was nominated for Supporting Actress for Saratoga Trunks. And Leo G. Carroll as Joseph was in 6 Hitchcock movies and The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah, I have not seen that Saratoga Trunk movie, but unfortunately she was nominated for an Oscar for playing a Haitian maid in blackface.
Don't like that.
Yeah.
Don't like that at all. But, well, Cecil Calloway, the father, he was nominated for 2 Academy Awards in The Luck of the Irish, and guess who's coming to dinner?
The last person I feel like we should mention here is Samuel Goldwyn, the producer, who was, of course, like one of the key figures in building Hollywood. And a lot of those reviews that I picked out, they emphasize Goldwyn as the sort of creative force of this more so than William Wyler. And I don't know if you noticed this, but I did certainly. And this is fairly uncommon that the final credit is for him rather than for the director, which is traditional. And he really kind of asserted that authority over projects that he worked on.
Well, I'm surprised you didn't mention Alice Ehlers, who was the harpsichordist who had a great solo at the party playing the harpsichord. But yeah, Samuel Goldwyn is as big as a behind-the-scenes legend as there is in Hollywood. And he said this was his favorite of all his productions.
So anything else you want to say about the legacy of this film?
Josh, you can try to quit me, but you'll never quit me.
You're going to haunt me. We're going to haunt each other. We're going to do this podcast beyond the grave, haunting each other.
Hey, could be worse.
Yeah. So that is Wuthering Heights. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can haunt us online and on social media.
Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. Go for Jason on the all-important Letterboxd. We are at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Punch You in the Face because you're an idiot for still being on that platform.
Yeah, I am an idiot because I am also on that platform on Twitter or X or whatever at Signal Bleed and at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky, which is now open to all, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. I'm also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and you can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch one of the movies we talk about, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We're still really interested to hear and see what you think of the movies that we watch. You can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And I mentioned goth music earlier, so you might as well check out my music while you're at it. Check out David Rosen on Spotify and all those places.
I will only do that as if you send me a picture of you dressed in goth.
There is one. I dressed as one for a comedy rap concert once, so I'll send it to you.
So,
goth rap.
Dave, do you think if there was a new version of Wuthering Heights that you would be the perfect one to write the score?
100,000%, yes.
You move over Robert Smith
if
Dave is here.
Yeah.
I'm taking that gig.
Jason, what do we have in our next episode?
Josh, as you said, we are doing some different things in this season. So we are going to cover the best live action short film, Gone with the Wind.
It's the opposite of a short film. It is the best picture winner. Tune in next time for Gone with the Wind. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
Well, I mean, she was just in one episode, so I'm not really sure who, but she must have made an impression. She got that Emmy nomination.
Nice.
Okay, she received an Emmy nod for guest playing Anna in the Mother's Day episode and played a different character in Not Another Monday. I don't know, whatever. You can cut this part, Dave. So
you don't know who Anna was in one episode?
I mean, it doesn't really help.
Iconic role.
Yeah, that's right. So,
I mean, you could try to find the synopsis of that episode if you really want to get into this.
Right. I don't need to.
Okay.
So maybe she was Estelle Getty's sister in there. Who knows? Whatever. So,
all right. Well,
okay. We'll move on from that, Dave. You can cut all that stuff there. So thank you for being a friend, Geraldine Fitzgerald.